Hey there, I'm Mr. Terry, high school history teacher. Welcome back to another History Teacher X video. All right, I am super excited for this video. It's from friend of the channel, Mr. Beat, and it's called, Why Are Mormons? Now, the big reason I'm so excited is that back in the spring, we spent a couple days together and filmed some content that he is going to put in this video. Now, I don't know what went in, and I have not seen this video yet, so this is going to be really cool to see what the final product looks like. All right, please support the original video. It's linked down below. Like this video if you like what we're doing here, and let's get started. Yeah, so back in the spring, he, cynical historian, and M. Laser came to Salt Lake City and were speaking at a conference. And I live in the area, and we hooked up for a couple days, and I helped show him a lot of the sites that are kind of relevant to Mormon history around here. And we talked a lot and was able to, hopefully help with this kind of production. So again, it was fun to hang out with those guys. And yeah, I'm just super excited to see what his final product looks like. All right, I can already see here, he is in Missouri. This is the Church of Christ. These are basically the Mormons that didn't go west, specifically that came from the Smith family, like Emma, his wife, and his son. And yeah, that's their temple. Looks kind of like a upside down ice cream cone, but very neat. Anyway, here we go.
I'm Mr. Beat. I'm here at Zion, the place where some people believed Jesus Christ would return to earth. Now, how do we know that this is the place where the second coming of Christ would happen? Some dude said God told him it was. Where am I? Well, before I tell you exactly where I am.
So it's Jackson, it's in Jackson County, Missouri, is the place where Joseph Smith said the sort of second coming is going to be, and also where the Garden of Eden was. And that is in around there. That's around Independence. So not far from that area, but they actually have a site kind of laid out, a specific place where they think that is going to be a place called Adam Omdi Amen. Mormon history is something I'm very interested in as well. So see if I have a lot to say here.
I will give you a hint. I'm somewhere in the United States.
Right.
Which means this video is about, yep, you guessed it, the Mormons. Mormonism describes the beliefs and traditions of members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Right.
Well, most of them. Mormons are both a religious and cultural group related to Mormonism. Some of them don't like to call themselves Mormon, I should mention, and some of them not.
Actually, none of them do anymore. They want to be called it used to be like Mormons, and then it was like LDS, and now even the abbreviation is not really well liked. So members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, using the whole thing. So synonymous terms in their meaning, but as far as like practicing members identifying, yeah, it has changed over time.
Nicest people I have ever met in my entire life are Mormon.
It's the stereotype, right?
But gosh darn it, the stereotype is true. They're darn good people. I love them. That said, you might be surprised to hear that the Latter-day Saint movement is... And
that would be a Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints temple right there. You can see the statue of Moroni on top, and he points towards the east, signaling towards the direction of the second coming of Christ.
This is one of the newest religions. It's only been around for less than 200 years, which is not much longer than I've been around, yo. And I've been around. But despite only being around for less than 200 years, more than 17 million people around the world currently follow the Latter-day Saint movement. Whether it's because of the Book of Mormon musical that the South Park guys created, or the common sight of missionaries like these guys knocking on your doors, you have probably already heard of Mormonism, especially if you're an American. So why did Mormonism become such a big deal? Well, it can all be traced back to this one smooth-talking dude. More on him in a bit. Here's the story of Mormonism. A uniquely...
The funny thing we were talking about with Mr. Beat, and we had filmed, he was kind of like interviewing me at sites and things like that, is, just being like zany and just sitting in weird places, like actually how good that is for kind of like filmmaking. And it's totally true. It's like you feel dorky. If you feel dorky, that's like, it's okay. In fact, it's like good. It sets you apart.
The American religion.
go on one of these planets. Through obedience to Mormon teaching and death and resurrection.
This is from a very famous
what are all these women doing in
anti-Mormon
I wish I took your advice and picked a new religion.
back from the
I'm gonna be
80s,
a Mormon? Are you sure?
You don't drink. You don't never taken drugs. You don't smoke.
Mitt Romney.
You're a family man. I mean, you're pretty perfect, aren't you?
Well, I think people would, particularly my family, would disagree with that conclusion.
Some believe that such a confession of my faith will sink my
People
candidacy.
brought that up when he was running
If
for
they're
president,
right,
you know?
so be it.
Therefore, they did watch over their people.
Oh, those guys that
with things pertaining to righteousness.
those guys like that kind of run in that like Churdley's group. I think a lot of them are like former Mormons, and you see them do content, and you know they mock stuff and kind of make fun of it, but you can tell they like have a lot of experience with it.
It's good.
I was a totally strict and devout Protestant. I thought we went to heaven. Yes, well, I'm afraid you were wrong. I was a practicing Jehovah's Witness. You picked the wrong religion as well. Well, who was right? Who gets into heaven? I'm afraid it was the Mormons.
Yeah.
Yes,
I remember that episode.
The correct answer.
How Mormonism became a thing.
Before we get into it, this video is once again sponsored
Joe
by
Smith and
Ground
Brigham
News.
Young there.
Ground News has been a constant sponsor of mine because I truly believe in it. I regularly use it as a way to get out of my echo chambers and see how different media outlets spin different stories. Let me show you an example, We have a story here about President-elect Donald Trump appointing Tom Homan as border czar to lead immigration crackdown. 148 news sources have covered the story, 24 leaning left, 26 leaning right, 36 in the center. The bias distribution is 42% of the sources are from the center, 52% of the sources are high factuality, and 13% of the sources are independent news. Now, what I find most fascinating are the headline differences. On the left here, Rolling Stone magazine says Trump taps family separation mastermind to be border czar. Now, compare that to a headline on the right saying Tom Homan tells sanctuary city leaders, get out of the way because we're coming.
I haven't looked to see, and I guess they have it there. It's behind the QR code there, but like what does Ground News consider to be like center and right and left? If it's just center of each other, you know, that kind of thing. Because there's probably people like, no, you know, that's not left, that's not right, that's not center. I'm sure that's like debated, right? But I guess you just look at it in terms of not necessarily their labels, but left, center, or right of each other.
There. I also like the blind spot feature. You can see which stories are being covered by left-leaning news sources and right-leaning news sources. With Ground News, you develop a well-rounded worldview and see the nuance behind the headlines. Go to ground.news/Mr. Beat and click on the link to get 50% off unlimited access to the Vantage plan, which is the same plan I use, man. By subscribing, you are directly supporting an independent platform on a mission to restore facts, transparency, and trust in the news. Thanks to Ground News for sponsoring this video.
All right, early years. Yep, Brigham Young on the left. He was an early convert, and kind of the I like to say when you look at his history, kind of like the businessman of the early church. He's one that had that little bit more of that acumen, probably definitely than Joseph Smith had, as far as like establishing the economics and like the organization and looking at it and running it almost like a business in a way.
As I said earlier,
made it
in this
a lot more profitable
picture,
and
Mormonism all began
stronger
with
infrastructure.
This dude. Oop.
Other way.
Oh, over here. This dude, Joseph Smith. Without Joseph Smith, there is no Latter-day Saint movement.
Right.
Smith. What kind of last name is that?
The most common.
Anyways,
do you know the reason Smith is such a common last name is because, you know, Smith is a kind of like profession, right? And there's different types of Smiths. There's blacksmiths, you know, and etc. And back in the old days, you might be, you know, your surname might have come from a couple things, just the surname of your like parent, or the surname could be the name of a kind of your profession. So like there were so many Smiths, people that did smithing. That's why there's so many Smiths. I learned that. I always thought that was interesting.
Smith was born on December 23rd, 1805 in Vermont, one of 11 children to Lucy Smith and Joseph Smith Sr. Right. He grew up on a farm. After years of crop failures and failed business investments, the family moved west, specifically to Western New York State.
They were quite destitute, always working for like other people. And, you know, working a lot of their land. And if you work their land, you're going to get like a, you know, one room house essentially, and that was the living conditions for the Smith family. We were never really too well off, and there were plenty of failed kind of business ventures with his father and things too.
Historians later called this area the Burned Over District, in reference to all the passionate religious revivals that took place in the area
Great Awakening.
that marked the Second Great Awakening, a time when a bunch of people got excited about Protestant Christianity after going to camp meetings and listening to emotional preachers. There is evidence that the Smith family got caught up in the Second Great Awakening after moving to the Burned Over District. Joseph's mom, Lucy, especially got into it, although the Smiths apparently never fully dedicated themselves to just one religion.
His father did that a lot. He was bouncing around a lot of them and getting involved in a lot of them. So yeah, like the whole family was very much exposed to a greater religious revival movement that was going on with Protestantism in the United States and specifically in the Western New York area. It's a very interesting time to see this context, because other denominations of Christianity will also come at this time. Just Mormonism becomes the most famous.
Joseph's dad, Joseph Sr., apparently made money as some sort of wizard. I'm not exaggerating here. He'd claim he could see things all other people couldn't see.
Wizards,
and
a term you could.
He had the ability to find treasures. And people actually believed him, and they'd actually pay him to help them find these treasures. They even called it treasure hunting.
You hear this a lot more with Joseph, but that was like a thing back then, was these different like methods that people said they had for like finding treasures or like wells or just like finding phenomenon back then. Yeah, that was like a thing. But of course, so many people were grifting with it that they end up getting in trouble. And the Smith family, did participate in some of that and made them kind of peculiar amongst their neighbors for that.
Now, did Joseph Smith Sr. ever actually find any treasure? Nah.
I don't think those guys ever do, right?
He was making money, baby.
Not just talk about the Smith family, just everyone in general that wants to do that.
Joseph Sr. taught his son to hustle people just like he did, and soon Joseph Jr. was doing his own treasure hunts. When Joseph was about 12, he became interested in different religions, but wasn't fully satisfied with any one of them. In 1820, he told a Methodist minister that he had been praying in the woods near his home when both God and Jesus Christ appeared to him and told him his sins were forgiven.
This is going to be known as the first vision, and there's multiple accounts of it about like who was there. Was it just like angels? Was it just spirits? And then like there's accounts where like there's God, but then there's like also God and Jesus. There are multiple that were told for a long time, and there's like records of all of them. Now the official church one that goes into kind of church canon is you had God and his son Jesus Christ that were there in this vision, but there are these accounts of him telling it in different ways. I know it's become somewhat of a debate in and out of the kind of Mormon history community. And by the way, the framing of this, I know if you are a member of the church, probably don't like the framing of some of these things that might feel a little bit antagonistic. Understand this is coming from, another perspective, a non insider perspective, an outsider's perspective of that. So you might think of word usage as being a little more harmful or something like that, but might largely be consistent with Mr. Beat though, in talking about other things. And this goes to all of us, when you talk about histories and politics and stuff like that, you may hear wordage or framing that may look antagonistic, but you don't really see it that way. But when it comes to like your beliefs, you may feel that way. You just got to understand that there are these different perspectives of things when you're talking about history there. So the framing is going to be one thing, and then the facts of the matter, that's something else you would argue.
Oh, and that all appeared to him and told him his sins were forgiven. Oh, and that all Christian churches of the time had, quote, turned aside from the gospel. Well,
the sins were forgiven thing is not in the canon for the church, like that kind of thing that he was going to pray about, like getting sins forgiven, but more about what church was true, because kind of the canonical story is that, he was again part of this burned over district, and there's all these different preachers and all these different denominations, and that him and his family were like bouncing around them, and he wanted to know which one was true. So that's like the canonical story. But again, there are these other accounts that have surfaced, and some people question their validity or whatever, but they're out there and circulate, and people find these, especially when they're looking around online and trying to research it. So
the minister dismissed the story, basically telling Joseph he was full of crap.
I told my wife that you
saying,
spoke
like,
with
you know, God
and
doesn't
Jesus,
talk
and
to
she
people.
didn't believe it.
Well, it's true. I did. I was asking God
The
if I
famous
should be a Protestant or a Catholic or what. And suddenly God and Jesus appeared before me. And they said
South
I
Park
should start
episode.
my own church because none of the others had it right. And that's exactly how it happened.
That's much more like the canonical story.
Well, yeah, sure. Why would he make
Matt and Trey Stone, the creators of South Park, have history with the church as well.
that up?
Also, I should add that the, quote, first vision story has had multiple versions over the years.
Right.
The version I shared with you was the official church version. Flash forward to September 20.
It's much like the forgiveness of sins thing, as much, at least from what I had heard. But yeah, there are multiple accounts.
First, 1823. Yes, we actually have a specific date for this. That's the day Joseph said that the angel Moroni visited him and told him of a book made of golden plates, as well as a bunch of other really cool old stuff, was buried in a hill near his house. Yeah, that's the hill. Over the next 4 years, Joseph...
Yeah, I believe they kind of know where that is, that it's called the Hill Cumorah. There's this pageant they call the Hill Cumorah pageant that goes there, that kind of tells of the story of the Book of Mormon. But yeah, not too far from his home.
Supposedly tried to find this buried book made of golden plates, but couldn't locate them. Meanwhile, Joseph got much better at pretending to find lost treasure to a point where he was able to make money for his family, who was once again financially struggling by this time. In 1825, a dude named Josiah Stoll hired Smith to find a lost Spanish silver mine that he believed existed near Harmony, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, this was an area that was really getting interesting in a lot of that type of history. So the early Spanish history, but also some of the indigenous American history. And a lot of that, the scholarship on it wasn't very strong. And it really was kind of an interesting, like almost like historical knowledge vacuum about who were the indigenous peoples of North America. And, you know, what was the early role, say, of like the Spanish, like going up and having these mines up in like Pennsylvania. That's a lot of that's pretty far fetched there, but it does provide an interesting context that you will see a lot of the early theology and kind of stories that were going to come out of the Book of Mormon that kind of fill that kind of idea of what the history of that area was like before the settling of, Europeans. Anyway, Mr. Beat is using kind of a mix here of some of the canon that comes from the church, but then also some of the other sources and other arguments in there. He's kind of intermixing it throughout, if you're interested.
After finding absolutely nothing, Stoll's nephew, Peter Bridgman, sued Joseph Smith. What's crazy, though, is that Stoll was still a true believer of Joseph Smith. In fact, he testified at the trial to defend Smith. It was around that time that Smith met Emma Hale.
Yeah, he did kind of make some enemies, though, because he would do these like treasure finding things, but then they wouldn't find anything. And then they'd get caught up in like court and stuff like that because they would pay for this. One of them he does actually get found guilty of. It's called this like glass looker case. That was like a term that, but he didn't really have any money to pay it. So he really just kind of got off, but he was convicted of this, of essentially, I guess you'd call it like a fraud that way. But yeah, that happened as well. But yeah, it's during this, he's going to meet his wife.
While staying with her family in Harmony, as he helped Stoll try to find treasure. The two fell in love. However, after Smith proposed to Emma, her father did not approve of them getting married because he didn't trust him. Well, they got married anyway, eloping on January 18th, 1827.
Yeah, he hated him. He thought that he was just like a con man, essentially, and wouldn't be able to provide for Emma. Just concerned, I guess, as the parent, but yeah, did not like that. Like saying he didn't want to get into like legitimate business, and he really didn't like that, but had offered Joseph maybe to get into more like legitimate business. And he actually agrees to it. I don't want to get in front of what Mr. Beat's going to say, so we'll see. And I'll add things I think that are relevant to the story if he doesn't mention them.
Only after Smith promised to stop treasure hunting did Emma's dad start to come around, letting them live on his property and helping Smith start a legitimate business. But what about the gold?
So basically he said, you have to stop doing, I'll bless this, you know, this, if you stop doing your side gigs and like try to get into legitimate business. And Joseph said to to accept that.
Golden plates. Did you forget about the golden? Helping Smith start a legitimate business. But what about the golden plates? Did you forget about the golden plates? Let's once again talk about those golden plates. Supposedly, and this is obviously a pretty big supposedly, Smith returned to that hill near his old house on September 22nd, 1827, and finally was able to dig up that book of golden plates.
Yeah, it was said, and a lot of this was like post hoc. It was stuff that he discussed publicly like years after and was more like retroactive about what happened before. But like he had known about the place where these were, but like wasn't able to get them. And he would come back like every year and then eventually, you know, got the access to them. But again, a lot of these stories didn't actually come out till a lot later. So, you know, people debated like if he was just like, you know, keeping that a little bit more close to the chest, or were they post hoc explanations for things? You know, that's what the historians and people that debate, you know, they talk about a lot.
Smith began telling everyone all about the golden plates and apparently caused a big fuss. Smith said the golden plates had, quote, reformed Egyptian written on them, and he was the only one who could translate it into English. But
yeah. So like, by the way, this is before Egyptian, especially like with hieroglyphics, had been ever translated. It's coming up here pretty soon. It's going to be coming in the future decades, but yeah, referred to it as a reformed Egyptian. Now that Egyptologists don't really say that that's like a thing. And he had written down a lot of these characters. He had written them down, and he had actually shown people some of the characters. But people that looked at it, you know, that may have known a little bit more about what those characters were like, even if they hadn't translated, said, well, they're characters, but they don't really like mean anything. That's what they accused him of.
And he was the only one who could translate it into English. But nobody could actually see the golden plates, nor could they actually see Joseph Smith translating the golden plates. Well, isn't that convenient? Later, Smith claimed he could translate the golden plates without even seeing them. He could just put his handy seer stone in his hat, bury his face in it, and the stone would light up with the words to translate.
This is where the canonical thing gets a little bit different too. And it has actually been interestingly even brought up finally by the church with kind of the access to a lot of these outside of the church, you know, canon documents. The church has published a lot more within the last probably decade or so, talking about some of these other like conflicting, I guess you would say, accounts of a lot of these major events, and, you know, try to talk about their explanations. But like, you know, canon for a long time was basically, it had nothing to do with this hat, but it was like you had, and he's going to get Oliver Cowdery coming in probably here in a second, who was said to be the scribe, but like, Joseph was, they were like in a room, but there was like a separation between him and Oliver. So he had the plates and only he could see them. And then he would dictate, you know, and say it, and then it would get written down. But then you had this other account, and I don't know how many people said the hat thing. If Oliver was the one that had said that, I forgot exactly. But there's at least one, maybe multiple sources of this.
One person incredibly impressed with
Harris.
Smith's news of the golden plates and his ability to translate them was a rich neighbor of his back in New York named Martin Harris.
Who's going to finance
Harris
it.
traveled to Harmony and began helping Smith write down the translations in April 1820.
So yeah, you're going to get this too. So yeah, there's other people that had talked about it. So that's like what you're seeing there with the like curtain kind of coming down there, but anyway, yeah, Harris is going to finance it because the publication of it, they wanted to publish it, was extremely expensive. And when you live in small towns back then, printers were very, very expensive. And Martin Harris had a lot of money in land, and actually, I think took out like mortgages. We'll see if he brings up Martin Harris's wife, who was very skeptical of what his husband was doing with Smith. And anyways, we'll get to that. But yeah, used his finances to help publish the first, is it like 5,000? I forget what copies of the Book of Mormon.
One person not impressed with Smith's translations, Harris's wife, Lucy. She asked to see the translations for herself. Harris convinced Smith to take 116 pages of the translations to show Lucy to convince her, but it was at the Harris house that the translations somehow mysteriously disappeared.
So yeah, she wanted to see what they were working on, and they had these pages and pages of the writings, and Martin was like, please, Joseph, can I take these home? And I think he bugged him for a while. And then Joseph said, fine. And then we'll see what he talks about with what the story is behind them missing.
And so Joseph Smith put his head into a hat and read to me what the golden plate said. I wrote it all down and we're going to publish it into a book.
Martin, how do you know he isn't just making stuff up and pretending he's translating off golden plates? I'm gonna hide these pages. If Joseph Smith really is translating off of golden plates, then he'll be able to do it again. But if Joseph Smith is making it all up, then the new translations will be different from these.
Okay, fine. I bet he'll have no problem.
Oh, he had a problem, all right. Okay, that's speculation now, but regardless, when...
So yeah, that was a story that she was like, okay, if he's really true about this, let's hide the pages, and he should be able to retranslate them like perfectly, right? Because it's like a translation. And we'll see if he gets to what happens after when they start working together again.
Smith heard about the missing translations. This devastated him. You see, he apparently was not able to translate those first 116 pages again. Smith then said Moroni returned to him and took the golden plates away from him as punishment for letting the translations get away. Conveniently, Moroni returned the golden plates to him a few months later. And after that, both Emma and a dude named Oliver Cowdery helped him translate new stuff.
Okay, so he gets with Cowdery. So the kind of the canonical explanation of that was that no matter what was going to happen with those translated pages, that it would be basically a setup to prove Joseph wrong. Like, for example, if he went out and like translated them exactly the same way again, that like Lucy or any of these other detractors would come up and bring in like different pages or something, and maybe not the originals or something, and say, look, he did it incorrectly. So like it was kind of, said that it was like a lose-lose situation no matter what was going to happen, because his detractors were going to maybe falsify things in that way. So what ends up coming out of the canon was that part of the plates he was not allowed to translate from again. And that was referred to as like the Book of Lehi. And so it wasn't going to be translating from those records, but the story that had been told in these plates were very similar to another section of the plates, which is going to be the first book in the published Book of Mormon, which is going to be the Book of Nephi. So it was like the story was going to be relatively the same than what was in the originally transcribed plates, but it was maybe not going to be word for word. And that's kind of the canonical explanation for how they reacted to this situation with Martin and Lucy Harris.
The new stuff began, quote, "Thou deliverest up that which was sacred into the hands of a wicked man who has set at naught the counsels of God and has broken the most sacred promises which were made before God and has depended upon his own judgment and boasted in his own wisdom." Yes, this was in reference to Harris losing the first translations. But despite the trash talking of Harris remained steadfastly loyal to Joseph Smith and the church. This new stuff ultimately ended up being what we now call the Book of Mormon.
He will eventually leave the church, and he goes and gets involved in some other religious groups as well. You can look into kind of what happens to Harris down the road. But yeah, he eventually will go on kind of, a different path and adopt some other beliefs as well.
First important holy book of the Latter-day Saint movement. And yes, later there was a famous musical making fun of it. The golden plates, by the way, just went back to heaven after Smith was done translating. That's
a big thing that people will say is like, well, where are these plates? But yeah, the canon is that after they were translated, they were basically taken away from Joseph and go to heaven or something like go to heaven.
June 1829, the Book of Mormon was complete. Smith got a publisher to make copies of it, all financed by, you guessed it, Martin Harris, who mortgaged his farm to the publisher to pay for printing costs, then later sold his farm to pay off the mortgage. Poor guy. Ever since, more than 200 million copies of the Book of Mormon have been printed. Around this time, Smith said he got another revelation from God. Hold up. I think I'm getting a revelation from God.
Oh. His little mockery.
Oh. Huh. Never mind. That was just my stomach growling.
Oh, jeez.
Anyway, Smith said God told him that only 3 dudes would know firsthand about the existence of the golden plates. David Whitmer, the aforementioned Oliver Cowdery, and Martin Harris, obviously.
The witnesses.
I mean, the guy has money. They'd be known as the Three Musketeers.
No.
Or, I mean, the Three Witnesses.
You could make a religion out of this. You can make a religion out of this. You can make a religion out of this. You could make a religion out of this.
Bill Wirtz.
Smith,
I mean, that's what's going to happen.
Viewed as a
said after they eventually leave New York, and we'll see. I don't know how far he's going to get in the history there. I guess Martin Harris was like confronted by people, because he kind of put his name to this, being a witness, and they had said, I think it was in Kirtland, where he said like he didn't see the plates like the way you normally see stuff, but you see them like with your sort of like spiritual eyes. And apparently that caused a lot of commotion, and a lot of people got very upset about that, and I guess left and dropped their beliefs right away. Some of them.
Prophet officially founded his new church at various locations in the burned over district on April 6th, 1830. At that time, it was simply called the Church of Christ. Smith and the Three Witnesses claimed that Native Americans had believed in Jesus Christ hundreds of years before he was even born, and that he later appeared to them after his resurrection. They also claimed that their church held the only true form of the Christian religion that went directly back to Jesus Christ.
Right. So Joseph was like bringing it back the rightful order, of the church. The Jesus visiting in America thing, an explanation with that they match with the Bible is the 3 days when he was dead, that he went to the Americas and spoke there, and then, eventually was resurrected.
Harris said that anybody who didn't become a Mormon within 2 years would be kicked off of the planet. No big deal. Now, while Smith was able to quickly attract new followers to be baptized into his young church, he also attracted a lot of criticism from other Christians who said he was a charlatan. After all, many knew about Smith's earlier treasure hunting schemes.
Smith family had kind of a reputation.
Smith's authority began to be undermined after Cowdery, a dude named Hiram Page, and other members started to also claim to be getting revelations directly from God. In response, Smith said that only he could get revelations from God, and that all those other revelations were from the devil.
By the way, this will also lead into the secession crisis that happens after Joseph Smith dies, with all these people that claim to be the torchbearer, that were speaking for God, or that Joseph had wanted them to. It's one reason why there's going to be splinter groups upon his death. But getting ahead of ourselves here, again, very interesting. And I know, again, for the framing, some of you might be like, this may sound like, especially if you remember that, the church may sound like disrespectful or whatever. A lot of you might be thinking this is very humorous. I think this could definitely be interpreted, because when it comes to religion and history, people, you're emotionally invested. So people are going to feel a variety of different ways about this type of content.
Soon, Smith's followers were threatened with mob violence, and Smith himself kept getting arrested. On June 30th, 1830, he got arrested for being a, quote, disorderly person. After being found innocent, he was arrested again right after his release. Due to all this, Smith decided to move his family and followers west to Kirtland, Ohio,
you get some Sidney
getting
Rigdon
there in February
action here now.
1831. Meanwhile, Smith...
First of many times that group is going to have to move. Others are going to be moving to other parts as well. Oliver Cowdery, he's going to bounce over to Missouri and other, going into other areas and settling other areas. But yeah, Kirtland kind of becomes the new home
Smith had sent Cowdery and others to Missouri to convert Native Americans to Mormonism.
And that was very seen as the government did not like that. There was treaties and things like that. Interesting. I think the person, correct me if I'm wrong here, that was head of like Native American affairs was Clark from the Lewis and Clark expedition, I think. Right. Which is the one that died younger? One of the two. Sorry, I it slips in my mind. But basically it said like, no, don't do that. You're supposed to be going into their areas, not going into their homes. So that was something that they did not like in Missouri, was that. But like, it seemed like a great recruiting tool if you think about it for the church, because remember the Book of Mormon is about the history of these people. So they thought it would be very appealing, as converts for indigenous peoples to hear about that. And, there was some success.
On the way there, Cowdery came upon a preacher named Sidney Rigdon and his more than 100 followers in northeastern Ohio. Rigdon was impressed with the Book of Mormon, and within a couple weeks...
Hey! Yeah, we went to the Church History Museum. I showed him the Church History Museum in Salt Lake, so there I am. Big boy Terry
had declared Smith's religion the truth with a capital T, and he and his followers all became Mormons, just like that, man.
He had a large congregation. Sidney Rigdon was he was the passionate speaker. He was known to be a guy that would have these just, hours long sermons, and people would be so emotionally charged and they're like in tears, and he had that like impassioned way of speaking. And that was one thing like Joseph Smith did have around him, was a lot of people that had these different skill sets. Like I was saying earlier, Brigham Young was a really good business mind. Joseph, not as much of like the public speaker like that, but very good talking with people more like one-on-one or maybe small groups. But then there's like Sidney Rigdon, who again is a professional speaker essentially, and was good at that stuff and getting people impassioned.
In Kirtland, Smith still kept getting arrested and still kept facing violent mobs. On March 24th, 1832, a mob broke into his house in the middle of the night, dragged him from his bedroom, tore his clothes off, beat him up, tried to poison him, and even tarred and feathered him. But Smith...
One of the rumors about that is they had come to find out about some of his dealings with some of the women and some of the younger, potentially women in the community. And this is where you're going to start to get some of those behaviors probably get talked about soon. Polygamy is going to be coming on the way here pretty soon, but that, I don't know how confirmable those were, but that one in particular, or at least one of the tarred feathering in particular, was one of those. And there was even, I heard a rumor that like there was a rumor, I don't know what you call it, but there's a source or whatever, that also they had a doctor there that was going to cut his what off, and ended up not doing it in that, and they ended up just tar and feathering him. But again, one of the things they're accusing him of, potentially, I don't know if those were true accusations. I've just heard it talked about that he had been mingling with some of the women in the community, and some of these husbands and brothers and stuff were not big fans of that. But that is also something that's up to a lot of conjecture, and you'll hear different things from different types of sources in the church and outside of the church. But I'm not laying any certainty on them, just telling you things that have been talked about, I guess.
Smith survived, and after that had lots of success growing his church. By the middle of 1835, there were nearly 2,000 practicing Mormons in the area. It was in Kirtland that Smith began to become interested in polygamy, or the act of having more than one spouse at one time. Smith's friend Isaac Morley had multiple wives, and Smith was like, maybe I could pull that off too, eh? It was also in Kirtland that Smith decided he wanted to build the City of Zion, a new Jerusalem, or a holy city where they could worship freely and await the return of Christ.
You have something to add.
And where did he want that City of Zion to be? Missouri, of course, specifically Jackson County, Missouri, which is where I'm at right now. Smith sent hundreds of Mormons to settle in Jackson County, but this freaked the locals out, and they formed militias to prevent settlement.
Man, it's so hard to do a Mormon history video in like 35 minutes, but we'll see if they talk about getting kicked out in Kirtland. But one of the big dramatic instances was, it said that Oliver Cowdery caught Joseph Smith with a girl that was basically worked for the Smith family, a girl named Fanny Alger, and it said that Oliver kind of caught them sort of in the act. And some people have talked about that in kind of post hoc rationales, or saying that she was like his first wife, but like that really polygamy hadn't really been talked about in that way then. But again, Oliver Cowdery, he ends up getting into a big fight with Joseph Smith, and he leaves over it, the polygamy idea and some of these things. So he actually ends up coming around back into the church later in his years. He always had believed that, and like many that actually left kind of the community there, that had believed that and still believe that Joe was like a prophet, that he was inspired and did all that, but he was a fallen prophet. You'll start to hear that kind of discussed.
Plus, many Mormons ended up dying of cholera there. Long story short, the city of Zion didn't work out, and many Mormons fled to nearby Clay County. In March 1836, back in Kirtland, Smith led a dedication of Kirtland Temple, the first Mormon temple. In January 1837, Smith and other church leaders created the Kirtland Safety Society, a company that at one time issued currency. Well, Smith and several Kirtland Safety Society associates later got accused of fraud, and once again the locals were mad at Smith for stealing their money.
There was this is where you're gonna have massive financial problems. There's gonna be a lot of people upset. There was a lot of money being lent to Smith that wasn't being paid back. Their whole banking, they basically made their own bank. That thing's going to collapse, part of a larger banking collapse that also happened not too long from now in the United States. But it was getting economically very bad, and there's people that were getting more critical of him and his behaviors, as well as his economic practices as well. And this is where you do get some of the people that are going to splinter off at this point and kind of do their own thing as well.
Not only that, but Smith and Cowdery were now bitter enemies, especially after Cowdery said Smith was having an affair with his teenage maid.
Fanny Alger.
So it was time for Smith to bail again. This time, Smith headed to Missouri himself, along with Sidney Rigdon and a new group of Mormons settling in Caldwell County, specifically in a place called Far West, which is where I'm at right now.
And this was supposed to be a place, according to the Missourians, that was going to be like the Mormon county. Like, this is where you can go and you can do the things that you want to do, but try to like confine it to that county.
That's right. I've been here the whole time and you didn't even notice. Caldwell County was supposed to be a safe haven for Mormons, but some of them still lived outside the county, leading to more tensions with non-Mormon settlers. Right. After non-Mormons wouldn't allow Mormons to vote on August 6th, 1838, a big fight broke out, leading to a siege of the town of DeWitt.
So one of the things that the people that were already living there didn't like is the voting blocks that Mormons were doing. And because they were spreading out in these different counties, a lot of people didn't like the political influence that they were having in voting in these blocks. Another reason why they wanted to kind of confine them to like their county.
Ultimately leading to all Mormons living there getting kicked out and a wider conflict known as the 1838
Missouri Mormon War.
It was during this war that the Missouri government arrested Smith and charged him with treason. Behind me is a building, but inside that building is the actual jail where Joseph Smith and his brother spent more than 4 months. I'll put the footage on the screen right now. You're looking at it. The tour guide inside was telling me that the guards all loved Joseph Smith. Smith and his crew supposedly were able to escape after bribing the guards with whiskey, although they were probably going to let him free anyway. Oh yeah, we're in Liberty, Missouri now. This is Liberty. See, look at that.
It's a funny little jailbreak kind of.
The 1838 Mormon War culminated with Missouri Governor Lilburn Boggs issuing Missouri Executive Order 44, aka the Extermination Order, which kicked all Mormons out of the state.
Right.
If they didn't leave, they'd be killed. 21 Mormons died during the war, including 17 at what became known as Hans Mills Massacre.
This became a rallying cry for that whole era, which was tragic. A lot of innocent people were killed there at this little settlement called called Hans Mill. Yeah, Boggs is a big enemy in church history. There was an assassination attempt on his life. He was shot, and Boggs said it was a hitman from Joseph Smith, a guy called Porter Rockwell, and was never able to like confirm it. Rockwell actually, after he hoofs it out of there and was going to be gone. He's going to be gone for a long time. But yeah, it said that it was a hit job.
The Mormon refugees fled back east to Illinois. They soon established a new settlement along the banks of the Mississippi River, calling it Nauvoo. Smith became the town's mayor, of course.
Big growth
One of the
here.
notable settlers of Nauvoo, Brigham Young. He had been with the Latter-day
Brigham?
One of the notable settlers of Nauvoo, Brigham Young.
He did kind of say it, Brigham Young. It's one of the memes about Brigham Young and the young women.
He had been with the Latter-day Saint movement since Kirtland, and by now was one of the church's most influential leaders.
He was the businessman.
Nauvoo, the Mormon church prospered and gained national attention.
I think that's
not all of it good.
House.
Smith was also able to attract a few more rich and influential.
Yeah. This is an interesting one that came out just a few years ago, a daguerreotype that came from, was it the Church of Christ? That some of them believed this could have been a photograph of Smith, which again didn't exist. Some people say that it's maybe one of his brothers as well. Hard to confirm this because it doesn't look a ton like the paintings, because there's a lot of paintings of him, but it's possibly. But church has not confirmed that, and I don't even know if those that have it, like it's kind of an insider kind of thought about if that's him or not.
Converts like this dude, John Bennett. Smith planned the construction of the church's second temple, the Nauvoo Temple. It wouldn't be completed until 1846.
He grifted a lot of the Mormons in Nauvoo.
And even then was only actually used for less than 3 months. More on that in a bit. It was also in Nauvoo that the church began to change some of its doctrines.
By the way, the church has bought up real estate in pretty much all of the areas that Mormon history has gone through, from New York to Kirtland and then Missouri into Illinois. And they do a lot of preservations. They've done a lot of reconstructions. It's actually really cool. And you can go on, these, you could do a whole month or something and just go to all these sites and visit them, and really cool.
One of those doctrines? Yeah. Plural marriage. Yep. Polygamy was now more accepted among Mormons. And
I think Bennett was
Brigham
really down with that,
who at
too.
one time
He
had
really,
as many as
I think, pushed it when he
56
showed
wives
up.
and 57 children, led the wedding ceremonies, which Mormons called sealing ordinances, of 2 of Smith's plural wives in 1842. Smith would have as many as 49 wives himself before his death, with some getting married to him as young as 14 years old.
So I'd like the Fanny Alger, if you can see her on there. A lot of these numbers kind of get disputed and talked about how much they were. The church also has positions of it, but doesn't deny the polygamy.
Ugh. Perhaps due to all the polygamy, by the end of 1842, popular opinion had
one of the common things I hear about the Joseph Smith polygamy is that they didn't have intimate relations. That has been talked about a lot, or at least just not citing proof that they had that, especially for a lack of children. And I know there's some people have responded about why they didn't have children and other intentions that they had that are in these conversations as well.
Against Mormonism. Oh, here we go again. As more and more of the locals turned against Nauvoo's residents, Smith went to the United States Congress to try to get it to make Nauvoo an independent territory with the right to get protection from federal troops.
Yeah, very debatable
After
if that's an actual picture.
He was
of
like,
him.
fine, I'll run for president of the United States.
He does.
Running in the election of 1844. No joke. Not only that, he started his own militia and a...
Yeah, I mean, he was hoping for a lot more support. He was hoping for essentially like reparations for a lot of the stuff that had illegally been done to the taking of Mormon settlements and property, and actually was going to visit the White House and was pretty much laughed out, though. He wanted reparations of essentially millions of dollars, and he came back from that meeting and was like, I just going to run for president as well. And he's basically like a Whig, very much part of the Whig party for a lot of it, but was really going to run on kind of like American individualism and maybe oversight of the government, that kind of thing. But had a lot of had a lot of Whig values as well, though.
group called the Council of 50, established to decide which national or state laws Mormons should obey and which ones they should ignore.
Basically their own government.
It also set the framework for a Mormon government. Yeah. By the time of Joseph Smith's presidential campaign, the population of Nauvoo had swelled to 12,000, making it the second most populous city in Illinois after Chicago. However, Smith's presidential...
And I think even that, wasn't it really close with Chicago? It was a very formidable Western city in the United States.
Campaign.
Having it situated on the Mississippi was supposed to be of great economic value. That's why one of the reasons they settled there.
Ended in Illinois after Chicago. However, Smith's presidential campaign ended. Because he died.
Yeah. Right.
After newspapers published negative stories about Smith and Mormons, Smith ordered his militia to destroy one newspaper's printing press. Well,
Nauvoo
this led to
Expositor.
more people getting upset, and long story short, Smith and his brother Hiram got in trouble for inciting a riot and eventually were charged with treason in Carthage, Illinois.
So there was a printing of a new kind of like newspaper called the Nauvoo Expositor, and it was bringing up these things about Joseph Smith and like the polygamy and things like that. And it did not make him and the church look very good. So the printing press was actually destroyed, and that was seen, you know, especially in this era, it's like destroying the press and like freedom of the press. It's essentially like treasonous activity that way. But they were saying they were printing, you know, lies and slander, and they were printing another issue. You can actually see the issue of the it's been digitized of that first sort of newsletter. The Nauvoo Expositor is what that's called. So that was seen as egregious to the other people in this part of Illinois.
On June 27th, 1844, an armed mob stormed the jail Smith and Hiram were in and killed them. Mormons everywhere, and by this time they were expanding into Europe, were devastated by the news of the death of Joseph Smith. Their prophet had died.
By the way, nobody brought to justice for that murder.
Most non-Mormon newspapers, however, described Smith as a religious fanatic. Not only that, there was no clear person to take Smith's place as the leader of the church.
Now, the other thing that the government was and the locals in Illinois was very, very wary of is the giant militia that Smith had. 5,000 or so, pretty much an army size that would liken to like what the United States Army was at that time, because the United States Army was minuscule and raising your own army was seen as treasonous activity. And they had sent people to basically like arrest him, and they saw him, you know, and giving, you know, like a speech in his like military regalia. And that was basically reported, that he's pretty much has his own army. And add that to the printing press thing. This is where all this stuff is kind of adding up against his favor and seen as a kind of problem. He's also becoming famous across the country as well at this time. People knew him and knew the Mormons, and there was talk about them. And they were not unknown to the people of America.
Leading to a power vacuum. There was no clear person to take Smith's place as the leader of the church, leading to a power vacuum. Well, Brigham Young seized the moment, making himself the new leader of the church.
Sure. It becomes this kind of thing. You know, there was the Smith family, and they're kind of saying that legacy kind of goes through him, specifically through his son, Joseph Jr. So there's those that kind of believed in that. I don't want to call it like a secession crisis from Muhammad, but like the Prophet Muhammad, but kind of a similar thing where it's like, hey, does it kind of go through like their family, like the Smith family? Is it somebody chosen from the community? Kind of like the Sunni Shia split. But anyways, Brigham Young, remember he was the business minded guy that was popular, somebody that seemed to be somebody that people could trust for their livelihood. And a lot of them went with that, and they're going to flee the United States, as you're going to see. But but then you had those that kind of stick with the Smith family. A lot of them are going to remain there and thought that moving west was kind of silly. That's where you're going to get the origination of like the Church of Christ, which I think is the second biggest denomination that comes from the sort of Mormon family tree. Sidney Rigdon also said that like he should have sort of been the kind of the successor to, and some of his devout people, I think, go with him. And there was this guy Strang. There's a bunch of people that basically claim to be the successor. But what you're going to see famously is so many going with Brigham Young, and, you know, convinces them they got to leave the country.
And most everyone pretty much went along with it. That said, not everyone went along with Young, and after Smith's death, several groups splintered to form their own denominations. Right. The largest of these was the Community of Christ, which today is based in Independence, Missouri. That's their temple, just a couple blocks from Harry Truman's house,
seeing a lot more,
as a matter of fact.
A little more progressive. Branch.
Anyway,
for example, they're the ones that have like female clergy. Can't remember.
By 1846, the violence on Mormons was only getting worse. Due to the escalation of conflicts between Mormons and other Illinois residents, Brigham Young decided to lead his followers west to a place where they could practice their religion in peace. As it so happens, the United States was about to win a war with Mexico and gain all of this territory. Holy crap.
Yeah, it wasn't Mexico for very long, because they're about to leave, and then almost immediately, Mexican-American War is going to finalize Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, but yeah, they were going to go there. Now, if I remember right, though, wasn't polygamy illegal in Mexico? I remember. By the way, a bunch went to Canada as well.
Yeah, Young figured some of that land should work as a new place for them to settle, and so they headed west. Following what is today simply known as the Mormon Trail, they traveled 1,300 miles into the western frontier. When they arrived in what is now Utah in the summer of 1847, the Mexican-American War was still going on. The land still belonged to Mexico, but it might have been obvious that the land would soon be under American control, as
Mexico had basically not settled it. There was there's a lot of indigenous peoples, and they're going to come into conflict and different types of interactions with the church. But yeah, the Mexican government had very little influence there.
Mexico's capital was about to be obvious that the land would soon be under American control, as Mexico's capital was about to be captured.
So in 1846, when the Mormons started going away from Nauvoo, they were trying to get away from America, but in the meantime, America came to them instead.
This is at Capitol Hill.
Kind of obliged to send an entire battalion down to help conquer Mexico.
I was here this day.
So this
I was here with them.
The Mormon battalion. They had to go
I was behind the camera.
winter quarters, which is kind of in Nebraska today, and go all the way down
Utah
into
State
New Mexico
Capitol.
and then across the desert into California. By the time
cynical historian, if you don't know him, he's a PhD, and his focus is on the American West. So he knows a lot about the history of the Mormons in the West, and has done a lot of study on it as well.
Got to California, John C. Fremont and the Bear Flaggers had already conquered California, so they essentially became constabulary troops. They became the first people who participated in the gold rush. These guys who were scattered across California to maintain the peace suddenly got bit by the gold bug.
They were hoping for a gold rush in Utah too.
But they just kind of scattered and went panning for gold, because what else are you going to do in California?
The first Mormon scouts arrived at what's now called the Salt Lake Valley on July 21st, 1847. When Brigham Young first came upon the valley 3 days later, he supposedly said,
this is the place. Yeah, so this is a famous park on the east side of Salt Lake City. There's a monument here. We'll see. They show it, and it said that, he said this is the place, like they're going to settle. There's actually Mormons that had been there about 2 days before that had already kind of started settling.
Quote, "This is the right place.
This is the place." Yo! Those were the famous words uttered by Brigham Young. There he is. The pioneers came west. They came across this canyon right here, Emigration Canyon. And Brigham Young here pointed out over the Salt Lake Valley. This was indeed supposed to be the place for the new Zion and for Brigham Young to continue to build the church. I like to also think too, let's be honest, this mountain range back here is basically the end of the Rocky Mountains. And to come out of the canyon and be so exhausted, probably came out here and said, you know what, this has got to be the place. I can't continue doing this. There's a big lake over there. Is it the Pacific Ocean? Oh, it's not the Pacific Ocean? Well, let's just say it is. This is the end. Okay, this is the place.
Over the next few years.
That was so dorky. That was so dorky. It's like this funny, cynical view I have that they come across. They're like, oh my gosh, how much further west we can go? We just got out of the mountains. There's a lake. Let's just like pretend it's the Pacific Ocean and settle it. Oh, Mr. Terry. I even laughed at my own joke. That was cringe.
There's tens of thousands of Mormon pioneers would pass by the same spot to see their new home. Young planned a city there, naming it, quote, the City of the Great Salt Lake, after the giant lake nearby. But that was a mouthful, so eventually people just called it Salt Lake City.
Yeah.
Yep, that's how it looks like today. I got to spend some time here earlier this year with Mr. Terry and Laser and the Cynical.
Shout out to, these folks. They were, again, fun to hang out with. We're at The Pie, famous college pizza place at the University of Utah. Delicious pizza.
I'm here earlier this year with Mr. Terry and Laser and the Cynical Historian. It's an awesome city.
Utah is, it's Brigham Young. It really is. He built this. Is where, by the way, we're like where's a good place to sit and do this? I was thinking like more of like a formal setting. He's like, dude, let's just sit cross-legged like over here. So we're in front of the Utah State Capitol, and yeah, all right, let's see how much he puts in of this.
Awesome city.
Utah is, it's Brigham Young. Yep. It really is. He built this thing. Really, the LDS church today is the Church of Brigham. Joseph Smith was the big ideas guy. Brigham Young was the guy that put it into action. He was the businessman. He was seen as a caretaker, an organizer, somebody that could do that next phase of the life of Latter-day Saints. But yes, this is his image. But this was a place that was seen as secure, safe, away from any other type of, they hoped, interaction much with the government. We're on South Temple right now. South Temple was really designed to be sort of the main street for Salt Lake City as envisioned by Brigham Young. We're going to be coming up on his home for his family members as you keep going miles west. So we did basically like a little walking tour because a lot of it is built there. I mean, Brigham Young designed Salt Lake City. It's in a grid pattern. If you ever travel to Salt Lake City, you're actually really going to like it because all the streets are numbered and they have a central location around the temple that they built in Salt Lake. So it's actually really easy to navigate. And it was especially easy to navigate before we had, like our GPSs and stuff, because you could just be like, okay, there's 400 west and 400 south. Okay. Each 100 is one block. So you would do that. But yeah, this was fun. I felt like kind of like a reporter, and he just said, hey, if you have something to say, like, let's just talk about it. So shout out to Mr. Bede for letting me just talk. Here you also get Governor's Mansion and a lot of other big buildings, but this is really the lifeblood of Old Salt Lake City. Right here are two of the oldest buildings here in Salt Lake City. We'll see that big huge building in the back. That is the church's headquarters today. That's Brigham Young's house. Well, what am I saying? I talk about it. Let's see what gets in. And both are about Brigham Young's life. So on the left here, my left here, this is the Lion House. Now, the Lion House was meant to be a large residence for many of Brigham's wives. This could hold basically 20 families at a time. To the right here, this is called the Beehive House. Now, this was more specific for him, not just his home, but where he would bring in guests. The beehive and the bee really became a symbol here for early Mormons here in Utah, with the whole idea that bees are industrious. That was really their motto here as they were settling. The first thing I guess you would come and see if you were coming through the valley here is the Beehive House, be met by Brigham Young, and then see all the sights right here. That's the Eagle Gate. So like Mr. Terry's about to dork out. Yes. By the way, this intersection right here is where all the roads meet. It's the 0-0 axis of the whole grid system. Now, the coordinate system here not only is great for finding directions and things, but it actually extends much, much further than Salt Lake City. So everything comes back here. This is 0 west, 0 south, but you can go 20 miles plus south and still be using the same numeric grid system. And I think travelers are really going to like that when they come to Salt Lake City.
In the early years, though, it was a fairly isolated, tight-knit community where people shared most of their crops. Dang communists. Of course, Young planned a big, beautiful
They did a lot
temple.
of that, like back in like Kirtland and stuff too. Essentially, they owned stuff communally. Law of consecration. They were essentially, early commies.
It only took 40 years to complete. That's how it looks like today. It's, currently under renovation, in case you couldn't tell. Between 1846...
Yeah, it was not seen as great. It's not like earthquake proof. There's been some earthquakes or whatever, but they're trying to make it like earthquake proof. So actually closing it down for multiple years. I think it's still another couple years out. They're gutting the whole thing. It's the way it functioned inside. If you know about what goes on in temples is largely changing. They're doing a lot of projects. So this is not, by the way, the good time to go to Salt Lake. If you want to go to the sites here with the like with the temple, you can get kind of around the area, but they're trying to do like a lot of construction at the same time on multiple buildings to try to kind of get all done around the same time. So that when they open it up, there's not other projects going on. So like the large visitor center that they have, which is really cool, also under construction. So wait a couple years before you come to Salt Lake City. But after that, should look really good for tourism.
It's, currently under renovation, in case you couldn't tell. Between 1847 and 1869, approximately 80,000 settlers moved to the Salt Lake Valley, most of them Mormons. Now, keep in mind that the Ute, Goshute, and Shoshone nations all had claims in the area as well. And as more and more Americans came, there were more and more skirmishes between the two groups. Regardless, the Mormons branched out to settle far outside of Salt Lake City, dreaming of creating their own Mormon state called Deseret.
Look at that thing. So yeah, I mean, the other thing, and again, this goes back to Brigham Young being this like very, very good organizer. Was they just spread out? He said settlers, they're descendants of mine, or ancestors of mine that were sent to like central Utah. But yeah, they went all the way to Southern California, around where like LA is, and LA County, then up into like Oregon, and you see here, but they wanted this to be a state, and the U.S. government's like, no. Yeah, so the idea of this was going to be called Deseret, like a theocracy, I guess, for lack of a better word. And that was the idea, but again, didn't last too long because this all got eaten up by the United States of America.
Even after that, though, it was pretty isolated for at least a couple decades, right? They kind of did their own thing.
For sure. This was not settled by any means, so they were really trying to build the Zion, this new homeland, really literally out of a desert. This was definitely... Brigham was the first governor, too, of the Utah Territory. Didn't get statehood till later. Big thing that held up statehood for decades was polygamy. The church had to give up polygamy publicly to get statehood. Definitely an island, I guess you would say, of the Mormon community. And that would have been the original reason why you were here. Now, as time has gone on, the state has become definitely more secular. There's still a lot of religious influence here, as you can see with a lot of the local laws. And right here, we're at the state capitol here, absolutely dominated by church members in the legislature. But today, in a lot of ways, Salt Lake City is really kind of looking and feeling like almost every kind of American city.
Today, many of the Mormons who live in what's known as the Mormon Corridor can directly trace their ancestry to the first Mormons who settled here in the second half of the 1800s. Congress created Utah Territory as part of the Compromise of 1850. And President Millard Fillmore made, you guessed it, Brigham Young the territory's first governor. Wait, and he also made him superintendent of American Indian Affairs? Ouch. Keep in mind that Young was already the leader of the LDS Church. So we had a little bit
That's why I brought up that term, like almost like a theocracy, religious leader, because he's a prophet. He's a prophet, somebody who speaks with God, but is also the political leader of a vast territory in the Western American West.
Mixing of church and state going on here. Yeah, with Young in charge of both the church and the state, it was basically a theocracy. Young supported legalizing slavery in Utah and polygamy, of course. And there was the Utah War, aka the Mormon Rebellion, a clash between Mormon settlers in Utah and the federal government, lasting from May 1857 to July 1858. Well, it wasn't much of a war, or even much of a rebellion for that matter. 150 people did die during the conflict, but 120 of those died during the Mountain Meadows Massacre.
So one of the rumors about that was there was settlers coming through southern Utah on their way to California. And one of the rumors going around is that there were people in that wagon train that were a part of the Joseph Smith assassination. That's something that's been discussed. There was ended up being no proof of that, but this ends up being a big deal because they end up massacring, like you saw, tons of people.
paranoid attack on innocent people who just happen to be traveling through Utah. Not a good look, man, when Mormons are killing random people. After the tragedy, Young stepped down from being governor.
There was a big controversy of, and it's still debated, did Brigham know about it? Did he order it? That's been one thing. There's a lot of kind of shaky kind of opinions, I guess, on it, both for and against it. Nevertheless, it gets pinned on this guy named Lee, who was definitely there and was part of the order, and he actually gets the death penalty for it. So other than that, though, not a lot ends up happening as far as people being convicted of this massacre of travelers.
But would continue to lead the church until his death in 1877. Utah didn't become a state until 1896, mostly because that's how long it took before the Mormons finally agreed to ban polygamy. That said, less than 30% of Mormons actually practiced it before then.
And if you did, it was maybe like 2 wives. It's very expensive to support a family. There weren't not a lot of other Brigham Youngs out there that could afford just dozens of wives. So yeah, it was a minority.
And several continued to secretly practice it afterward. Yeah. By that time, many
by the way, that's another splinter group that will come off, because they're the polygamous sects that I know a lot of you have probably heard of about the LDS Church believe that like proclamation to end polygamy was not from God, that it was just a ploy to appease the government, but that they still believed in polygamy. So that's another splinter group that comes off, that keeps doing it. They're saying that wasn't inspired by God.
Mormons now lived in Utah. Today, just around 42% of Utah residents are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Still, there is no denying the big influence.
We are. You actually walk up a hill, to Capitol Hill there. So there's us, Sunoco historian Matus M. Laser. It's cool to see him. He came over from Europe, and there's me.
Mormonism has had on this state. Today, there's more than 70 branches of Mormonism. This map shows every country you can find Mormons. That's pretty impressive, especially considering how it all got started.
There is a lot more to, I'm not just saying Utah history, but Mormon history that is just now really coming out, and it is fascinating. It is a wild story. It's a Game of Thrones type thing. They should make a Game of Thrones style HBO series about early Mormon history. Take it from there to the early Joseph years, bring it all the way to Utah.
There's no way to sugarcoat this. Joseph Smith was basically a con artist, and anyone who says otherwise is trying to whitewash history.
Sorry for that framing that he had there. That's, I know if you were a church member, that's a term you hear a lot, that, he was a con artist. And I understand if you feel, upset about that, but understand his perspective here. It's total outsider perspective. And it's an opinion a lot of people share that are outside of the church when you look at these different parts of his life and the history.
Before his untimely death, he had been arrested at least 42 times, according to one source. Everywhere he went,
I don't know that source,
to attract
to be honest,
mob violence and controversy. Still, I argue,
there was
Smith had the last laugh.
There were a lot of attempts to arrest him that didn't happen.
Attract mob violence and controversy. Still, I argue, Smith had the last laugh. Mormonism is arguably the most successful.
This is the conference center. We had come in and started filming. We got asked not just a few moments after this to stop. They wanted you to have a permit. So we got shut down for filming. They wanted you to go through and get a media pass to do this. And the lady that was there that told us we had to turn off, the cameras, was basically saying, and fairly, that there are a lot of very antagonistic people against the church that come in and will try to film, things to make the church look, very bad. So they want you to get a media pass. Essentially, they want to vet you and see like, where are you going to be posting this content? So yeah, he turned it off. And I think he actually kept the audio rolling though, while they were, telling us we couldn't film there. But we actually ended up going with that same lady, ended up going on a tour around the conference center, which was really cool because these guys hadn't been there. I had been there, but we went on a tour and they were, pretty nice to us.
Full American-made religion. In fact, today the Latter-day Saint movement is one of the few religious movements gaining members, not losing them, due to the success of Mormonism.
Interesting, inactivity is very high in the LDS Church. but it's always growing because of the extensive missionary effort. So it's kind of like a trade-off.
In fact, you could argue that Joseph Smith was one of the most successful con artists in American history.
Understood his framing there.
I did a ton of research for this one.
He worked really hard on this.
As always, you can check out the sources I used for this video by
checking out the description of this video.
2 books in particular that I think you ought to check out are American Zion by Benjamin Park and American Crucifixion by Alex Beam. Both of these books are also linked below. Thanks to Mr. Terry and the Cynical Historian for contributing to this video, especially Mr. Terry. He went above and beyond, taking me around, teaching me about Utah history, and he read over my script. Be sure to check out both of their channels, but I know there's more to the story. What did I leave out?
There's a lot.
You bet your bottom dollar you better comment below to let me know all about
it. There's a lot, man.
Thanks for staying curious.
Yeah, thanks for Mr. Bede for inviting me along, and had a fun weekend with those guys, having them come in, and we saw some sights, and then we just, hung out and ate food and, did some good stuff. It's really cool how the history community on YouTube is very non-toxic to each other. They're very into working together, into collaborating. Mr. Bede's been a big part of that. He's been a really good person at connecting a lot of YouTubers and content creators kind of like through him. He's been a very good job. Like through him, I've been able to meet a lot of these other people that have been fantastic. So anyways, fun to do that. I told you some of the things I thought that maybe were more controversial, maybe they'd have brought up, or maybe not seen as like canon, or maybe be seen more as debatable, and hopefully you caught that on there. But I mean, there's a lesson in that anyways, that when every time we learn about history and learn about sources, that we vet those things, we know what competing sources they are, we know what the narratives are. Hopefully I gave you an idea if you want to get into this more. I truly meant what I said when he was interviewing me about how interesting actually Mormon history is, and it's a very hot topic to study right now because of the digitization of so many documents, early documents that are getting out from all kinds of different sources in and out of the church. So vet those yourself, look at them, take everything with a grain of salt. And I think that's a good message anyways. All right, with that, we'll see you all next time.